Hi, Mr. Dan here. I'm going to be making some tomato trellises, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through my process and kind of how I built them. Here's what they look like at the end. And here I'm back to my table saw, setting the blade and my fence to cut some of these 2x4s down. I decided to build the frames of the tomato trellises out of 2x2s, which is about 1.5 by 1.5. And I looked at the price of those and it was very expensive. So I was like, what's the cheapest way that I can make some of these supports? And I went and found some 2x4s that I could do a lot easier. There I just made the mistake. I forgot to set my blade height correctly. So I'm going back and resetting the blade height and continuing to cut. Of course, I also made another classic error here. Realized it about halfway through the cut, as my already messy shop was filling quickly with sawdust. Realized I did not connect the dust collector, reconnected that, and continued along with the cut. My plan was to make the two 2x2s from this, and I could cut the rounded edges off on both sides of the 2x4, and then I could cut down the middle-ish, and I should get about two pieces that are pretty similar in size. I think there I had the issue where my support at the end wasn't holding the 2x4 like it was supposed to. So once I did this, I cut a whole bunch of these in order to get them ready so I didn't have to reset my table saw again later. Alright, let's zip through the rest of these cuts. Here I'm kind of turning so I get the flat side of the 2x4 against the fence, and then I can cut two pieces of the same length pretty easily. Just kind of taking two 2x4s here, turning it into 4 pieces so I can work with my demonstration. Now I've got those pieces cut, and I'm going to get those ready to move to the next step. A little ungainly as I try to carry them around the workshop. Next, I need to cut my slats, or the little pieces that kind of go horizontal on the tomato trellises. I figured the best and cheapest way to use these was to use fence pickets. I was lucky that I had a bunch left over from a fencing project that I used. So and here I'm measuring some of my previous cuts to see what is the distance for my fence that I should use. I'm like, about there. I want to make sure it moves a little freely through that space so that I will get the right size for each of my pieces. And I'm going to set my blade depth, and remembering of course to do that this time. And now I'm going to go cut some of these pickets. They're pretty large. They're like 5.5 inches wide, so I can make about 4 or 5 of these strips from each one. Sometimes I do have nails from my previous project, so I'm going to pull those out so I don't scratch the bed of my table saw or stab me in the hand or do any other terrible things to it. So I'll go ahead and run these through. I'm using a nice ripping blade here that will let me push these through pretty quick actually. Those deep gullets in the blade help clear through the sawdust. Here you can see how much is flying back at me. It's partly why I do have my dust collection on, but I'm also wearing my mask because I do not want to breathe in all that stuff as I'm going. Big fan of wearing that mask and wearing my ear protection as I'm doing these cuts. All right, let's blast through these and get to the next. All right, cutting through them nice and quickly, staying safe, of course, using that push stick whenever it's close. Here I'm using like a piece of plywood to help keep it against the fence. I'm not quite supposed to do it like that, but I keep getting splinters with using my finger. So I just make sure to keep my hands nice and far back. Later, I found out that my blade wasn't actually totally parallel to the fence, and that's why I was having so much trouble keeping it against the fence. So I fixed that, and since then, I've had no issues, and it's been much easier to cut, to be honest. But it's tricky to get that length correct. All right. Next, I'm going to cut those strips all at the same length. I'm going to make my trellises in a square pattern, and that makes it so I can save a step so all the little pieces can be the same length. So here I'm going to be setting my depth stop at where I want it. My depth stop here is just a giant 2x6, 4x6 I think, that I'm just going to clamp to my workbench. Got so sick of those pieces moving. At this point I just got the biggest piece of wood I could easily lift and use that as my stop block. This makes it nice so I can just power through these and just cut all those little horizontal pieces to length nice and quick. All right, let's power through these cuts and get these ready so I can move to the next step. I'm going to be putting a bevel on the, or a miter on the edge of these so that it'll kind of turn the corner around the tomato trellises. And I found out a nice, easy way to do that. Here's the jig I set up to get those nice miter cuts on every piece the same. So I just clamped one of my scrap pieces to the side so that I can just cut a corner on each piece. I'll cut one edge on one side, just like that, zap it, and then I'll flip it over and cut the other side. So now I'll have 4 equal pieces that all have the same miters on them. Did end up with a little trouble with my stop block moving a little bit, so I had to clamp it down a little bit more. But a little bit of play in these is totally fine for a tomato trellis. Let's cut the rest of these. Boy, I wish I could work in real time this fast. Watch that pile kind of disappear. I need to cut all those with the little miters on the side. Okay. Next, let's do some assembling. I'm going to take my 4 pieces here, and I need to cut them down. I don't really want to use the full 8-foot height. It's a little much. I'm going to go about 6.5 feet. I had spoken to a friend of mine that's a master gardener. She told me that I wanted at least 6 feet of height, which is crazy. So I'm going to use about half a foot into the ground, and then the other 6 is going to be above. But I want to cut all these pieces the same. So I'm going to put all 4 on the table once I realize that's the better way to do it. Measure off of 1, and then I'm just going to use my square to mark the length on all 4 of my 2x2s. I don't need to be quite as exact as this, but I'm finding that it's good to practice exactness as I'm still learning and trying to figure out what way is best. Alright, now I'm going to just cut those 4 pieces to length right here on the miter saw, nice and easy and quick, so that I can get them close enough to the same length as we're cutting. Alright, and now I'm going to put the stake, the spear, on the end of the poles so that I can drive them into the ground. Found a cool little jig from YouTube, actually. Used it almost exactly the same, made some slight modifications. How I did it is I built that jig that I have on the left side there, which is just a square piece with some risers on it. And I'm going to put the pegs, the 2x2s, in there. See, I was testing it out with one of my offcuts to make sure that it was working correctly. I'm going to put a sacrificial fence there on one side so that the wood doesn't go all the way through. So cutting through that sacrificial fence, giving it some space so I can hold the 2x2 so it won't push into the back of the saw there. I'm just going to confirm that I'm cutting right in the center of the pole, so I'm going to mark the center here and check the blade. Now, of course, I'm using my scrap piece here, running it through and testing it. I'll show you a better angle here in just a second if you're curious what it looks like from my perspective. This was more to show you how I'm setting it up and testing it to make sure that it's working correctly. Alright, and this is from my angle, so you can see kind of what's going on here. I'm going to make the cut here on my first edge. Going to cut a little ramp out of the side. I'm going to turn the piece of wood onto another side, and I'm going to make a second cut, this time pushing it so it's flat against the jig. Move it to that third side, cut again, and then finally that fourth side. And I've got a nice little spear by the end of that. Alright, let's do some quick cleanup. Here I am playing with my dust collector. Not quite as powerful as the shop vacuum, I will admit, but still fun to clean up the space so that I can do my assembly in this very location. Alright, here we're going to do our layouts for our assembly. I'm going to decide on what distances do I want the horizontal slats to be on the tomato trellis. Eventually decide for about 16 inches apart, and I'm going to mark it out and space it on this one with a little bit of space out on the top. Once I kind of decide, checking everything along these 2 pieces, I'm going to mark these 2, realize, hey, I should probably just mark all 4. This is a little silly to do it. I'm going to get all 4 out, mark those lines across. I decided to use the lines always on the top of the slat so I don't get confused, and that'll help me with my layouts when I'm building it. I also make sure to write it down so I don't forget for the future trellises and then have them all, not line up and be incorrect, which would be very frustrating. All right, with those lines struck, I'm ready to do some of my first assembly. I'm going to build one side first and then continue on from there to build the second side and then connect the two sides all together. I am using exterior wood glue and my nail gun to kind of put this in and combine them nice and quickly and easily. That's my plan. All right, now I'm going to get my glue ready because I'm going to glue it first. And I take a look and I'm like, oh, I should probably put some more glue in there. I'm going to go refill it with my Tite Bond. Then I take a look and realize it says for interior use only. I change my mind and I'm going to go get my different bottle of glue, my Tite Bond 3. That one is rated for exterior use. So I'm going to put just a little dab of glue on those two sides, lay down the pieces that I've got, my little slats. I'm trying to get the edges right at the inside rounded edge of the slats. I'm going to put one in, knowing that I can still pivot it a little bit after I put that first one in, and then I'll pin it with the nail gun on each side. Oops, moved it, of course. Recenter it on the other side, hold it down, and connect it. All right, now I forgot that I should probably put some oil in the nail gun. Put a couple drops in, and I'm ready to keep going as I'm continuing to nail in. You want to put that oil in so that your nail gun doesn't rust out and get damaged too quickly. Hopefully this way my real cheap little nail gun will last a little longer. Okay, let's put the other two slats on, get them lined up on this side. I'm going to do the outer edges first. Hopefully that'll give me more movement on the other two so I can get the spacings ready to go. Put that piece in, nail it together. Carefully lay them out first. The Tite Bond 3 is nice because you get a little bit more working time when you're lining up your glue joints so that everything's going to work correctly or not. Perfect. Got it all nailed together. All right, now I'm going to take that one, put it to the side, and start on the second one. It'll be the same as the first one, so I'll speed it up a little bit. And I'm going to lay out those glue lines. I've already got the marks down, which is nice. And the marks are the same on all four pieces of wood, so I'll know I'll be able to use them and they'll stay consistent across the whole spacing. Do the outside pieces first to hold the distance in the center so that those should be a lot easier when I'm lining them up and nailing them together. All right, I need to connect the sides of them, and in this case I'm going to elevate them a little bit off the work table. Otherwise those edges of the slats are going to poke down and hit the table and I won't be able to get them flat. So this lets me get them flat. Just like before, I'm going to get the edges in. The first couple are the most difficult here because the whole thing is a little wobbly and I don't want it to fall on me or have any kind of general tomato trellis disaster. I'm going to put the first pieces in, and with those glue pieces connected, get the spacing set. It might not be perfect on the other side for my spacing or the bottom part because I'm doing the top side, but it shouldn't matter because, like I said before, those wood pieces will have enough give in them and movement where with the twisting and the changing of the seasons, it should still fit together fine enough to support the tomatoes in this case. I don't know if I'd do it the same if I was building a house or some kind of structure that way where someone's safety might be in mind, but they'll be fine for the tomatoes. Here I notice that the outer edge is a little bit wobbly, so I'm going to use move that support out to the far edge just to support that trellis a bit more on the top. All right, I'm going to continue nailing all these together now that I've got the glue in, and that'll help me get it all set up. I did notice that I had a problem here when that one did not quite fit in the correct spot. You can see that spacing between the slat and the support structure. I ended up clamping it down so that I could get that nail in. Hopefully that would be long enough for it to get the glue to dry. Then when I go to nail the next slat, I notice another issue, and this one has a lot of play. You can see there's a lot of space left in, but I don't notice that until I go over to that spot and I try to push it together. I'm like, wait a second, this is way too much. So I'm going to check my measurement, and I notice a surprising discrepancy that these two are not the same length as the rest of them in my pile. But that never happens when we're doing projects, right? Never realizing later that we made a big mistake. Fortunately, it wasn't so much later that the glue dried and wrecked it. It's always surprising how easy it is to pull these pins out with the right amount of force at the right location. But I'll rip that out quick and put the new pieces in that I've confirmed are the actual correct length. And later I'll go through and measure all the pieces I cut and find that a couple of them are wrong because the stop block must have shifted, or they were in from a previous project or something like that. So make sure you have the pieces correct when you are building something. Nice, so I've got that top side finished, one side left. I was a little surprised how easy it is to, that it holds together even when you move it with that missing side. This one's the easiest because it's already held together for you. I'm going to make sure to check this time that all 4 of my slats are the correct length before I connect them in. Put that Titebond 3 in, put that exterior glue in, and I'll start with the outside just to make sure there's enough spacing for the central pieces like before. And this way I'll be able to get my little tomato trellis done, and I'm ready to go. This last bit is pretty quick because the spacing's already set for me, and the little miter joints on the slats lined up pretty well. Not as perfectly as I would have liked, but you know, I think as much as I could have asked for on the tomato trellis here. Next time maybe I'll try to come up with some strategies to keep it more even, but this way did work out pretty well as I was building it. All right, and this kind of brings us to the end of our tomato trellis. Thanks for watching, and this is what it looks like in our completed project. See how tall it is, a little bit taller than me in my messy shop.